Hi friends, welcome back. Today we're going to do our next installment as we continue to learn about civilizations in the world. So I'm going to actually start out our conversation today with some new vocabulary. These are some words that you're going to see in the story that I'm going to read you. The first one is an archaeologist. Okay, it's a word you might have heard before. An archaeologist is somebody that studies the way that people used to live in the past. For example, an archaeologist worked for years and years to find the location of the ancient city. The other word, another vocabulary, is authority. If someone has authority, they have power. Like our government has power and they control the things that we do. A passage is another word. That is a space from one place to another where someone would pass. A tomb is a place where they bury the dead, which this will come into. This will be important as we learn about the story. And valuable. When something is very valuable, it's precious, it's worth a lot of money. Okay, so those are all words that you're going to hear in our read aloud today. So I want you to think back to what we learned about earlier this week when we talked about Hatshepsut. So we learned about the pharaohs in Egypt, and we learned specifically about Hatshepsut. So remember what the pharaoh's job was? The pharaoh's job was they were the rulers of their area. So, right here, can you see this? In here, sorry, I had that on the wrong page. Remember Hatshepsut was a different pharaoh. Do you remember what was different about her? It's a she. Pharaohs were only men. So if you look here at this picture, remember she wore a beard, and she just simply said, "Oh, I'm a man." So that was one way that she was very different than other rulers. She helped out and she wanted to really just take advantage of the situation and say, hey, I've been doing all this. I deserve to be pharaoh. And she did, because she did a lot of work. So she did a lot of help with other people. She helped her country thrive. And her predecessor was not happy. So remember, he covered up all of the carvings and everything that people wrote about her, because he wanted to have all the power himself, but he actually preserved it. That's what happened in our last story. So the story that I'm going to talk to you about today is somebody that you may have heard of before. I'm sure that your parents have heard of them. Today we're going to talk about King Tut. Now, King Tut is actually just his nickname. He's got a big, long word. It's actually Tutankhamen. So we just call him King Tut. So if you ask your parents, say, Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt, Uncle, do you know who King Tut is? Chances are they'll know at least a little something about King Tut. If you ask about Hatshepsut, they're not going to have any idea about her. Just different people have been known for different things over time. So I'm going to show you this beautiful piece of art. So many years after Hatshepsut died and ruled, another pharaoh would rule for 9 years and then become almost completely forgotten for 3,000 years. His name was, sorry, I said it wrong, Tutankhamen. Remember what I said his name was, what he's known as today? He's known as King Tut. And that's a tricky name, so I can understand why he would just be called King Tut. So he was only 9 years old when he became a pharaoh. Not very much older than you, huh? Could you imagine being pharaoh at 9 years old? That's crazy. But he also died when he was only 19. So that's not something that generally happens either. So I'm going to show you another picture. This is called the Valley of the Kings. Isn't that pretty? So we're not entirely sure why he died at such an early age. After his death, some thought he might have had some kind of an accident. But when he died, he was not buried in a pyramid like the other pharaohs in Hatshepsut's time. In his time, pharaohs were built in the hillside valleys. And that valley was called the Valley of the Kings. None of the tombs of the pharaohs of the Valley of the Kings were marked. Remember, we just talked about the tombs? So they're saying that all of the rulers that died were buried here, and the tomb is where they were put into. So there was no marker. There was no headstone. They didn't know where the different kings and pharaohs were buried. They were just somewhere here. So in an unmarked tomb in that valley, King Tut would rest, surrounded by his treasures and forgotten by the world, until nearly 33 centuries later. It was a really long time ago, wasn't it? So here, we're going to jump ahead in time, okay? Way further in time, closer to the time that we live into. So from ancient Egypt, we're going to go to almost 100 years ago. There was a British archaeologist named Howard Carter. And he was interested in trying to find the lost tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Well, his partner was a British nobleman named Lord Carnarvon. Carnarvon was also interested in finding the lost tombs in the Valley of the Kings. So over the next few years, they worked for and accompanied Lord Carnarvon. Carter found a number of ancient objects scattered throughout the valley. But in his mind, he had a bigger prize. Right? What do you think his prize might be? I think he wants to find King Tut's tomb. Well, another archaeologist found objects that had hieroglyphics written on them, mentioning Pharaoh Tutankhamen. Howard Carter was determined to find the pharaoh's tomb, and he was convinced that somewhere in the Valley of the Kings lay King Tut's hidden burial site. Could he find it? So remember, there were no markers. They were just buried in the hills, so they don't know really any specific place where to look for them. So trying to find the location of this tomb was not always easy, and it wasn't always safe even. Robbers would often show up to steal any valuable objects that they could whenever they heard of new discoveries. So in a book about his career, archaeologist Howard Carter wrote about one dangerous encounter with such thieves in the Valley of the Kings. A band of robbers had learned of a discovery, and on the moonlit night, the thieves crept through the shadows of the valley, determined to steal whatever they could carry away. But just as they were starting to gather their loot, a second band of robbers appeared with the same idea. So instantly, these two gangs attacked one another in a fierce battle in the moonlight among the burial sites of these ancient pharaohs. Well, the second gang chased off the first, but Howard Carter, in his nearby camp, heard the noise of their fight, and here is how he calmly described what happened next. I'm going to show you another page. Make sure that I get this the right way. Okay, so this is where they are. So this is our setting. I collected a few of the workmen still nearby, and I set out for the scene of the action. An expedition involving a climb of more than 1,800 feet over the hills in the moonlight. It was midnight when we arrived on the scene, and the guide pointed out to me at the end of a rope dangling down the face of a cliff. Listening, we could hear the robbers actually at work. I first cut their rope, cutting off their means of escape. Then, making a secure, good stout of a rope of my own, I lowered myself down into the cliff. This sounds really scary. I wonder what's going to happen. So there were 8 robbers at work when I neared the bottom. There was an awkward moment or two when eventually the robbers saw the reason and they departed, or they left. I spent the rest of the night guarding the spot. Why do you think that he stayed there to guard his spot? Think about that. You think he wanted to protect everything that was in there that they were trying to discover and learn more about King Tut? Probably. Well, for 6 years, Howard Carter searched the tomb of Pharaoh Tut. 2 men had focused their attention in one area of the Valley of the Kings, and all that was left in the ground beneath them were some huts in which the ancient workers had lived while they were digging up their royal tombs. Carter decided to give this area one last try. So think about that. He was working in this one area for 6 years and still hadn't found what he was looking for. So he said, okay, well, I'll try a little bit different area. So he and his men removed the huts and leveled off the soil below. As Carter finished removing the first of the workers' huts, he found something very exciting. For there, lost to the world for 32 centuries, and almost overlooked by Carter himself and his partner in 6 years of digging, was a stone staircase that led down into the rocky floor of the valley. Here's where it gets good. Carter and his men uncovered the steps one by one until as they cleared the dirt from the top of the 12th step, they saw beyond it. In Carter's own words, the upper part of a doorway. Atop the door was a hieroglyphic seal showing the door had been sealed shut under royal authority. Remember the power of the royal army and the royal government? Whoever had been buried there was either royal or someone that was very important to the pharaoh. Almost overcome with excitement, Carter cut a small hole in the door and he shone a light through the hole. Flashlight. Inside, he saw a hallway filled to the top with rocks. It took all of the self-control that he had to not break through and begin flinging the rocks out. Instead, he left some of his men to guard the place, and he covered the door up and rode through the moonlight thinking anything might lie beyond that passage. Yet, no one of them was exactly sure what Carter had actually found. Dun, dun, dun. So that is our cliffhanger. We're going to stop there, and we will continue this next week. I'll read you the rest of that. So, couple quick questions for you to think about. Number 1, what do you think Carter found? Number 2, what's this guy's name? What's his short name? What your parents would know him. Remember what that guy's name is called? Was this king an adult or a child when he became a pharaoh? Do you remember how old he was when he became pharaoh? Do you remember how old he was when he died? He's pretty young. Was King Tut pharaoh for many, 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 many years till he was old and gray, or was it just a short time? Do you remember if he was buried in a pyramid? If he was, tell me why. If he wasn't, tell me why not. Okay. And one question I'm going to leave you with to think about. So you guys are 6 years old-ish. King Tut was 9. So think about that. He was roughly the age of a 3rd grader when he became king. So think about what would you if you were king. Think about that. Think about the responsibility. Think about what would you do if you had that power. Till next time. Bye, friends.